there is no other single factor that impacts just about everything else in your life that matters to you more than sleep. So your performance, your mental performance, your cognitive performance, your decision making, your physical recovery, your immune system.
Mhm.
But then we're talking about your mental health and your relationships and how patient you are and how easy you are to get along with. And um, let alone sort of those long-term chronic health factors that you hear a lot about with regard to long-term sleep deprivation. I tend to focus more on
Yeah.
the things it's impacting day to day, because a lot of people, they'll hear those scary stories about sleep deprivation leading to heart disease, cancer, dementia, all true, but those are future problems.
Eric Rogers is a high-impact sleep consultant. He has a PhD in psychology and is board certified in behavioral sleep medicine, and the founder of Peak Sleep, which helps busy professionals perform better, achieve more, and enjoy a higher quality of life by improving their sleep. Our mission at the Leadership Disrupted podcast is to dive deep into all aspects of effective leadership in this complex, fast-paced, challenging world of work that we're all navigating. And I know how sleep deprived most leaders are. So we're thrilled to have Eric with us today. And as a former sleep specialist for the US Navy SEALs, as an executive coach, and as a consultant to professional sports teams, Eric has extensive experience working with elite performers in sports and business. So first of all, Eric, welcome. And I'm really intrigued by this conversation that we're about to have. And in terms of, I guess, just introducing you, any gaps you'd like to fill in, or anything else high level you'd like to share, just so we can kind of get acquainted with you, and then we'll start to dive into some of the meaty topics.
Sure. No, first off, thanks for having me, Dan. Glad to be here. The only thing I would add is that everything you said is true. I do work with individuals historically, but what I've started to do is work more with organizations as a whole, including leadership,
Mhm.
because the issue is so widespread that if you have an organization that is struggling in this area, its performance, its productivity, all of these things is going to struggle. Not only will it impact an individual, such as a leader or a individual employee, but the entire organization is going to be impacted as well. So I'm expanding into that domain currently.
Well, and I'll tell you, just from personal experience, I work with a global team, and I try to be sensitive to time zones. I try to be sensitive to work schedules, and I have noticed that there are members of my team who really push themselves hard. They want to be available, anytime, that they're asked. And I've had more than a small number of individuals where I'm wondering, why does he not just why doesn't he seem on today, or why is, and it's not so obvious that they're like nodding and falling asleep, but a lack of sharpness or a lack of clarity. And I think I'm trying to be more sensitive to that because, well, the thesis of this podcast is that our world is changing, our world is shifting, and we, in fact, are cognitively overloaded. But we've gotten so used to it, we don't even realize. We don't realize that at the end of a long day of meetings, events, all the things that happen, plus we've got media coming at us all the time, news coming at us all the time, information, misinformation, disinformation. We're just stimulated over and over and over again. And taking a little 5 or 10 minute break doesn't really do it. And so at the end of the day, I think I have a team working for me where I have to be sensitive to their cognitive overload. And I think many leaders do without realizing it. So it's not just me managing my own sleep. It's not me managing my own nutrition, my own energy. All of those things are good, but it's also true of my team. And I that's a tough challenge. I don't know if that prompts any thoughts.
It does. I mean, um, you know, organizations spend a lot of time in hiring the right people, training the right people, but it doesn't matter how impressive somebody is if they are compromised in any sort of way. Um, that's how they're going to perform. So, I always say a race car becomes a Prius real quick if it's not maintained properly. And the same thing happens to us. The problem is, and we can talk about it in a little more depth if you like, but the problem is that over time, this sleep debt builds, and we start
Yeah.
to lose perspective on how impaired we actually are. And that's a real common and big issue, actually.
Well, and I think that the invisibility of it is a huge topic of discussion. You were in the military in your younger years in the Army. I was in the U.S. Navy in my younger years. Yeah, I I look back now at the kind of sleep deprivation we endured, and I guess there are things that your body and mind are able to do in your 20s that I could never do today. Um, but even then, it was more of a masking. It's not like you could be 100% sharp when you're sleeping, 4 hours out of every 24 hours or something to that degree. And then today, I just think we get used to it, and we don't even have the self-realization um, that we're not as sharp as we could be. Um, do you have client organizations that are, I guess, recognizing, hey, this is an issue, it's a broad-based productivity issue for the organization, not just for individuals?
Right. Well, sort of to build on what you were already just speaking,
Yeah.
I'll share just a personal example. When I was in the military, I worked with special operations, and that meant I had to go through some trainings that
Mhm.
they went through, and one of them is called SEER. Um, there's a variety of them across the military, but the one I went through was 2 weeks long, and it included a lot of sleep deprivation because it's supposed to sort of prepare you for, um, what it would be like to be a prisoner of war. And towards the end of that training, I went nearly 4 full days without sleep,
Yeah.
and r I reflected on it afterwards, on how I felt. And I remember vividly, feeling tired, obviously. I was tired. It's not something I recommend anybody ever trying, but I also remember being surprised that I felt functional. I felt surprisingly together.
Mhm.
To the point where if I had been given the option to, say, drive home after this training, I would have done it, not realizing that I was incredibly impaired. But the more deprived you get, the more sleep debt you build,
Yeah.
the less perspective you have on how impaired you are. It's not exactly, but it's sort of like, um, drinking. Right? The more drunk you get, the less aware of how impaired you are. Something similar happens with sleep deprivation. So that's where it can become actually physically dangerous. So I do work in some industries in which they're working for very long shifts. 16, 24-hour shifts. And that can become very dangerous because the more impaired they're getting, the less aware of it they are also becoming. And so they're going to put themselves into dangerous situations. They're going to potentially drive home, like I was
Yeah.
considering doing, which would have been very, very dangerous because as you recover and reflect, you're aware of how incredibly impaired you were. So yeah,
And so
that
then
was
with
just a personal example of
no,
that.
no, that's a great example. In fact, a story just occurred to me that I just remembered. Um, this goes back again to my Navy days, but I was on leave and I had to get back to San Diego, and I was driving, and I had a 36-hour road trip,
Hmm,
and it was going to take me all 36 hours. So I drove for 36 hours straight, and of course, I went through the way that like the cycle of feeling more and more tired, more and more tired, and then weirdly, like they say when you die from freezing, you start to feel warm.
right.
Well, I started to feel awake, and then as I got into the state of California, I was feeling more awake. Like I was feeling fine until because I remember driving at night and I started seeing spiders on the road, large spiders on the road, and I felt perfectly awake and perfectly lucid, and they were big. They were big spiders, but I realized, okay, something's up. If I am hallucinating spiders on the road, um, and then when I did get home, it took me half a day to fall asleep. It's like I got home and I couldn't fall asleep. So yeah, there's
Right.
sleep deprivation does weird things to one's brain.
I think what we don't always think about though, your example and my example are examples of what they call total sleep deprivation or acute sleep deprivation, where
Mhm.
you are going for a long stretch of time without sleeping. And um, for most of us in our day-to-day life, the thing we have to be much more concerned about is chronic
Yeah.
insufficient sleep, which builds, right? It's cumulative and it builds over time. And again, just like with total sleep deprivation, where you go for very long periods of time, you start to lose perspective on how impaired you are, even with chronic day to day little bits of sleep deprivation adding up. And it's called sort of baseline resetting. And some people interpret that. When I worked with the SEALs, a lot of them would have the belief, and I know that this is a very common belief, a lot of people hold it, that they were getting used to um, short sleep,
Yeah.
right? So sleeping 5, even 6 hours regularly, believing that they are training themselves to need less sleep. But what is and I understand because I've experienced that myself, but what's really happening is you're becoming your baseline of what is normal keeps
Mhm.
adjusting and and you are getting used to being sleep deprived. Your body is not adjusting or requiring any less sleep than it ever needed to. You're just more accustomed to the experience of being exhausted.
Yes, and just as like if you were only getting 800 calories of food a day, your body will adjust. You'll feel, oh, this is normalized now. But it's not actually normalized. It's just that your body's is evolving to try to fit the situation. But I think part of what happens, Eric, is that media like is is programming us because of course we hear about this billionaire only requires 4 hours of sleep a night. This tech wizard only requires 5 hours of sleep a night. This person gets up at 4:15 a.m. and works out for 90 minutes before getting started. And of course, those things come at us And I think we are being programmed that if you are ambitious and you're committed and you want to be a winner and you want to be successful and you want to do all the things, all right, get up early, train yourself to only need 5 hours is nothing. Only need 4 hours of sleep a night. And while I think there may be that rare person who actually only needs the 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night,
Very
I'm not
rare.
even sure that they actually exist. I know they
They
exist in media.
they actually do exist,
Okay.
but it is less than 1% of the population. And you and I both know that there are many people who believe they fall into that category or
Yeah.
believe that they can prepare or train themselves to require that. And realistically, uh, they are fooling themselves. Um, if again, going back to that sort of baseline resetting, if you go long enough, you might start to believe you're doing
Yeah.
it, but you are being impacted. I've had many clients who come and they say exactly what you said. I am exhausted. I don't know why. I'm trying, I look online and these people say, well, you should really only need 4 hours of sleep. If you're
Mhm.
really motivated, they try to listen to these things. It's extraordinarily bad advice. Um,
Is there a way to self-assess to determine what is one's actual baseline need for sleep?
yeah, the best way to do that is just to track it over time. First, you
Huh?
should assume that you are not in that less than 1%
Right.
category. And for a period of time, and this is another sort of big consideration,
Mhm.
most of us, we talk about sleep debt. How much are we carrying? Because every night we don't get what we should be getting. Something is being added to our debt. And we often hear the idea, and a lot of people try this. Uh, they will willingly add to this debt during the week with the assumption that I'm going to then pay it off on the weekend.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's what they'll attempt to do. Um, that might help a slight amount, but you are not going to pay off what you accumulated during the week. It doesn't work that way. So you're going to carry more into the next week and the next week, right? And so a lot of us, if are carrying around much more debt than we realize, and to pay that off requires us to get what would be a recommended amount of sleep, seven, somewhere
Mhm.
7 or more hours of quality sleep over a period of time. So, one of the first things I would do is encourage people for at a minimum 2 weeks, see how much of that debt that they can pay
Uh-huh.
off, see how they feel. A lot of us, I used to fall into this category. I'm not in any way, shape, or form trying to judge anybody who does this. It's very common. And I did it as well. But
Sure.
I remember when I went through this process, when I was starting to get heavily into sleep and paying off my own debt, the realization after a few weeks, because that's what it will take for a lot of people to eliminate the debt that they've built, weeks, potentially even upwards of a month. But then I remember the feeling I had when I finally paid it off. And it was a feeling that I had when I was younger, of that sense of being truly rested. And we lose sight of that as adults. I don't think many of us actually can even remember that experience of what it feels like to be truly rested. But you can get there,
Yeah.
but it takes time. And then once you get there, then you can start to adjust. Well, okay, Do I need a little more than 7 hours? Some people do. Am I actually okay at 6.5, 6 hours and 45 minutes?
How will
No,
you like how what would be the indicators? Would the indicators be that you're naturally waking up earlier uh, than you've scheduled, or somehow your body is responding in a way that not responding to artificial alarms, but
right.
you're just waking up and feeling like, okay, I could get up now and I could start doing whatever.
That's a good indicator, if you are able to sort of maybe on a weekend not set
Mhm.
an alarm and your body naturally wakes you up after, let's say, 7 hours of sleep. That's a good indicator, especially if your subjective experience is, "I feel good.
Yeah,
I feel rested." Right? So you combine these 2 things to get a general indication. But I think if we want to really be safe, just understand that 4 to 5 hours. I'm spe- like just about every single person who's listening to this. That is not enough for you. It's not. You may want it. You may because the perception is, well, then yeah, I can work more or I can get more done. But that is essentially shooting yourself in the foot. So
and
assume
the
that you
price
need at least 7 hours.
and the price you're paying. I'm going to say the price we're paying is such a subtle price. It's not as if, okay, well, you only got 6 hours of sleep and you're bleeding out of your eyes. No, I mean that then of course we would stop. But
Yeah.
oh, you only got 6 hours of sleep, and it's such a subtle price. You're not quite as sharp. You're not quite as quick. You're not, um, and I'm speaking like I needed this conversation. I need this conversation because I have been consciously looking at taking on another project. But in order to take it on, I need another hour out of my day to do it. And that means waking up an hour earlier because I can't work on it in the evenings. So normally I wake up at 7 a.m. and I have my first meeting at 8 a.m. To do this project, I would need to wake up at 6 a.m. And I don't know. I don't know that that time is available. I could force myself. I could force myself to do it, but at a cost. And you're right. I'm exactly what you've been talking about. I'm one of those people that has persuaded myself 5.5 is good enough. 6.5 is good enough. Um, and then I wonder why early afternoon, mid afternoon, I need to take a nap. I need an extra cup of coffee. I need all of the various stimulants that we try. And again, the stimulants can to some degree make you feel like you're productive, but you lose that edge. And we've got leaders we're expecting them to make critical decisions. We're expecting them to be innovative. We're expecting them to be amazing thinkers. And I think, what must the cost be if you have an entire workforce, whether it's 300 or 300,000 people, if you have an entire workforce that's sleep deprived, and so you're losing, let's say 10% of their effectiveness, that's got to be huge in terms
Huge.
of what it's costing you. Um,
Hundreds of billions of dollars in the US economy
yeah.
is lost due to this specific issue. I mean, if you think about it, some industries are a little higher, some might be a little bit lower, but for any leader out there, they should sort of understand that about 40% of their team falls into this category.
Mhm.
That's a lot. So 40% of your team is not operating anywhere near their full potential. And I like how you described that. If we were bleeding through our eyes, we'd fix it immediately.
Yes.
That that is true. Um, My only counter would be, I think we still tend to minimize the impact of
Yeah.
what is actually happening. It many times I think we view it as, well, I'm I'm more tired today. I don't feel as good today. But sleep, I tend to talk about it more in terms of what it can do for you. And then obviously if you don't have it, the inverse is true. But there there is no other single factor that impacts just about everything else in your life that matters to you more than sleep. So your performance, your mental performance, your cognitive performance, your decision making, your physical recovery, your immune system.
Mhm.
But then we're talking about your mental health and your relationships and how patient you are and how easy you are to get along with. And um, let alone sort of those long-term chronic health factors that you hear a lot about with regard to long-term sleep deprivation. I tend to focus more on
Yeah.
the things it's impacting day to day, because a lot of people, they'll hear those scary stories about sleep deprivation leading to heart disease, cancer, dementia, all true, but those are future problems. And we always talk about in the military, focus on the closest alligator to
Mhm.
the boat. That's the priority. And so I try to frame these things as, hey, what is this doing to you next day? As a leader, you're right. We do hear about the people who sort of brag, talk openly
Yeah.
about the fact that they're functioning. I question whether or not they're functioning.
Well, and it's a pet peeve of mine because people in leadership roles or people who hold themselves up as, social influencers or whatever, when you stand up or you share that expectation, um, particularly leaders of organizations who in any way think they're getting by on 5 hours, let's say 5 hours of sleep a night. And so you become one of those leaders who, in so many ways, you communicate to your team, this is what I expect from the winners. I expect you to respond to the email that or the chat message that I sent at 6 a.m. or Saturday at 4 p.m. Or in so many ways, I'm communicating my expectations of engagement and and without realizing I'm eating into the creativity, I'm eating into the innovative thinking, I'm eating into the pure mental energy of people, and I may be working, my ambition is probably getting in the way of my ambition because I think I'm inspiring, but in fact I'm debilitating my people. um,
Right.
and yet I know there are some leaders who just think their role is to drive. Just drive, drive, drive. I'm going to drive myself. I'm going to drive you. I'm going to squeeze as much out of you as I can. And part of my way of doing that is squeezing as much out of myself, or at least that's the impression that I create on social media or wherever. Um, I suspect many of those drivers, they have plenty of downtime, but they just don't share the downtime the way they share their driven time. So we
I
hear.
always say,
Go ahead.
just to build on that, Dan,
Yeah,
I always say, when we glorify a certain well-known leader for achieving something amazing, and we know that they tend to minimize or not sleep a lot, 4 or
yeah,
5 hours a night. One, I'm not very impressed by that, because my comeback is, yeah, but what could they have achieved if they actually were operating at 100%, right?
exactly.
Um, and I think to your other point, in terms of these leaders who value driving their team and pushing their team, I understand it. I do. I think that it's common. But what I think is being missed in all of that is the law of diminishing returns, right? Um, not all hours are as productive as other hours. And productivity, we can be really good for a few hours, but then it
Mhm.
starts to sort of peak and plateau. And if we push beyond that, it starts to dip. So they did some interesting research a few years ago looking at what happens when somebody works over a 70-hour week in terms of a
Mhm.
team. And their productivity ends up around the same as if that team had worked a 50-hour week, right? So you know, over time, it's just we lose the efficiency. So we can either value hours put in or we can value quality hours put in.
Yeah.
And the quality hours actually lead to then less burnt out employees. You keep them longer, less turnover, less absenteeism, less presenteeism, things like that.
And I know we have a lot of people who have returned to the office, but there's still a significant percentage of remote workers like yourself, like myself. And I did find that I had to re-engineer how I managed my time mentally, because the remote work environment will suck out of you everything that you're willing to give it, because there's never a lack of meetings to be had. You're in, multiple time zones. And I found that I had to establish boundaries just to say to my work colleagues, 7 a.m. is my boundary. It has to be, because it actually used to be 8 a.m. 8 a.m. was my boundary. I said no meetings before 8 a.m. But then I started accepting a few. And then once you accept a few, then people start scheduling more. Every meeting is important. And I had to think through, all right, what can I do? What is reasonable? Um, but if I were to set the boundary at 5 a.m., there'd be meetings being set at 5 a.m. So at some point you do have to decide what the boundary is. And then I have to force myself to take downtime during the day. Like you said, nobody can just be on for 5 hours at a time, 10 hours at a time. So I try every 2 hours to schedule in some kind of break or downtime. Um, my challenge, and not that this is all about me, but my challenge is I will toward the late afternoon, the workload will start to diminish, and I'll do some things on my own. But then once my family time in the afternoon or evening, once I've done my family things and the family kind of settles in, my brain is working, and so I tend to walk back into my office, log back in, start working on something, start writing something, and you start that around 7:30 or so, a couple hours. My brain doesn't just shut off, and so starting at 7 or 7:30 ends up being 9:30, 10 o'clock. I feel like I've still got some wind in my sails. Go to 11. Oh, maybe I'm feeling a little tired now. Go to bed by 11:30 or midnight, but my brain is still cogitating. So I don't actually just drop off to sleep. I end up uh, having a sleep deficit, and I'm trying to think through how do I set real boundaries that will give me the deep rest time. I made the mistake of I bought a Garmin wrist thing that
Mhm,
monitors my sleep and
mhm,
tells me how much deep sleep I get.
mhm.
I was thinking, all right, maybe half. Like I would get half deep sleep. It's, I'm rating very poorly. I am not getting much deep sleep at all. I move a lot. I move around a lot. I'm up and down a lot. I'm not getting much REM sleep according to my Garmin device. But um, I
Yeah.
I'm not even sure why I'm sharing that.
That's
In terms
actually
of
a really can I that's actually a really important that point you just brought
Yeah.
up. The population I tend to work with, people like yourself, they're they work hard, they care about their performance, whatnot. Many of them track these things. They wear
Mhm.
trackers to track diet, exercise, sleep. Um, but because of that, I think I should say something about sleep tracking.
Please, yes.
Um, so in general, I'm not a fan, and I'll say that with a few caveats. But the reason why I'm not is because many times what happens, well, the first thing is what you brought up, this idea of, oh my gosh, it's telling me I'm not getting enough deep sleep or I'm not getting enough REM. Um, at this point, none of these trackers, Garmin included, are very good at measuring stages of sleep,
Mhm.
even though their marketing suggests that they are. And it's very compelling marketing. I'm not saying it isn't. Beautiful visuals and whatnot, but they're not very accurate. And the reason why they're not accurate is that they don't have any sensor on your head, which is required to get an accurate measure
Mhm.
of stages of sleep, which the hallmark is brain activity, right? So they put out this information, which is relatively bad information, and it causes a lot of people to worry and stress. Oh my gosh, I got no REM sleep last night.
Yeah.
And then that fuels the other problem I have with it is sort of the self-fulfilling prophecy aspect of these devices. When you wake up and you look and it says, I don't know, you got your sleep score is 60 out of 100. That immediately is impacting how you're going to approach mentally and physically how you're going to approach the next day, right? And the reality is I'm a huge proponent and know the importance of sleep, but at the same time, we know that just because of one bad night doesn't mean your day has to be ruined. We've all had experiences where
Yeah.
we didn't sleep well one night and we still had actually a pretty good day, right? So if your score on this device is sort of predetermining how you're going to feel during that day, that's a problem. There was a really interesting study they did a little while ago where they looked at this very thing. They had, I'm going to simplify it a little bit, but
Mhm.
they had people sleep. One group of people slept for 8 hours, one group of people slept for 5 hours. But then what they did was they went into the rooms and they adjusted the clocks essentially on the walls. So the people who slept 8 hours thought they slept five. And those that slept 5 hours thought they slept eight. And both groups responded accordingly,
Wow.
right? So that is the power of the mind in this.
Mhm.
So sleep is incredibly important. It can't be replaced. However, going in, the power of the mind is incredible and can dictate,
Well, I'll
how
tell
you're
you,
going
so
to perform.
I'm not necessarily gonna throw this away because it does
No,
track some things that I definitely want to track. However, this is great. I'm honestly, and what you're saying makes so much sense. Um,
if somebody is going to continue to use it, which a lot of people will,
sure.
my recommendation would be not to look at the score every day, but maybe look for an average at the end of the week.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. I'm tracking mine for like just heart rate and other things, but I
Sure.
think not like looking at the sleep score with a little more of a jaded eye, like not just assuming that that is gospel. That
And it doesn't have to determine what kind of day you're gonna have.
yeah, yeah. In terms of, I'm sure many of us we've read, if we're having any kind of issues with sleep. I'll tell you what this did do for, not for me, to me, because my sleep score seemed chronically low no matter what I did. So
Mhm.
then I went on a journey of trying all kinds of things. I'm going to try melatonin. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try that, and nothing seemed to change. And it never occurred to me that, well, maybe the issue is actually this, not not my actual sleep effectiveness. Um, but we try a lot of things without necessarily addressing the root cause. And I think for this conversation, everyone can go to the internet and can search, get more sleep, get better sleep, or whatever. Um, but I think root causes are more challenging. Like how do you think through what are some of those things that you might be doing to yourself inadvertently, where you are either not preparing yourself, or maybe is it, I don't know, is it as simple as just scheduling, just making sure you book yourself the time to go to sleep at a certain time and give yourself the full 7 or 8 hours, whatever you need. I don't know, what kind of practical guidance or advice might you have?
Yeah. Okay, so this is the big one. This
Okay.
is a big topic. You said a lot there, and it's all very relevant. I think when we generally think about sleep, we classify everybody as being a good or a bad sleeper. And everybody falls into sort of one of these
Yeah.
categories. But the problem is, it's not two categories. It's sort of sleep performance is on a continuum. And where you fall along that sort of determines what the right recommendations for
Mhm.
you are. But in general, you can break that into three broader categories. You have the good sleepers who are getting enough sleep, it's effortless, and it's high quality. Great. They should just continue doing what they are doing.
Yeah,
It's
I
the
hate those
other
people. But
groups.
yeah, I agree. Yeah, keep doing what you're doing, but honestly, it's kind of annoying that there are
Yeah.
some people that without effort, they just fall asleep, they get their deep rest. They don't have
And now,
it's like those people with 8% body fat who don't even work at it. They just somehow
yeah,
arrive at 8% body fat. I hate those people.
the difference between sleep and the body fat example is the fact that they're not trying is actually one of the secrets to their success. Effort,
Yeah.
trying to sleep is actually one of the worst things you can do for sleep. And I know that that's challenging, and that's again going back to the sleep trackers. It creates a pressure and an
I might be,
effortful
I'm probably
approach.
the poster child. I decide I must get more sleep, and so it becomes a task. It becomes a
Right.
thing. So,
And that's the thing with sleep. You cannot force it. The more you try to force it, the harder it
mhm,
becomes, the more you push it away, right? So the difference then, okay, so we've got three categories. This the good sleepers, the
yeah.
ones who are not struggling. But then the real important difference is between the other two categories. Um, one of them is in general, sort of the individual we've been describing so far in this talk. Those that are maybe working too much, have a lot of responsibilities at home. They're maybe not prioritizing sleep where it should be. Whatever it is, they are not getting either a high enough quality of sleep or enough sleep. So that group I tend to describe as sort of the group that could benefit from um, optimizing their sleep maybe a little
Mhm.
bit more, right? But then the third category, about 30%, about 30%
Did
of
you
the
do that?
population. That was amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. I
um, and they, I have no idea. And
yep.
they are people who are actively struggling. So you've got group two that,
Mhm.
for whatever, you know, conscious, maybe slightly unconscious, they're just not prioritizing or being allowing themselves enough
Yeah.
opportunity for sleep. The third group, they would love to sleep more, but they struggle to sleep. So these are people with insomnia. These are people with other sleep disorders like sleep
Mhm.
apnea, right? So they are there's about 30-ish% of people that are going to fall into this category. And the problem is when you go online and you look for solutions to sleep better, many of them are going to be directed at that second group.
Yeah.
Hey, like, go to bed at the same time every night, or make sure you get 7 hours, things like that. Not bad advice. It's just not good advice for people in that last group who want to sleep better. They're the ones who are most likely to listen to that advice and
Mhm.
try to implement it. But the problem is some of that advice can actually make their sleep worse. So it's convoluted. But I would say those are the three big categories. So my advice would be tailored to each of those groups. However, there are a few things that are global, right? That pretty much everybody would benefit from. Um, One of those, you brought up this idea of um, going to bed at the same time every night. So that has to do with our circadian rhythm, which, if you're looking for underlying things that control our sleep, there's really two of them. One is the circadian rhythm, which is sort of that
Mhm.
internal biological clock that operates roughly on a 24-hour cycle. It determines how alert and how sleepy you are going to be throughout the day. So that's one thing that uh, controls sleep, and the other one is referred to as sleep drive or sleep pressure. And you can think about this as like a balloon, just like balloons that went a second ago. But in the morning, after a good night's sleep, your balloon should be deflated, almost
Mhm.
empty. And over the course of the day, it gradually fills with more and more air, more and more pressure. You want this balloon to be huge by the end of the day,
Mhm.
as big as possible, because that's going to help you fall asleep faster and stay asleep longer, right? So those are the two big things that, if you're looking for underlying root causes and you're not addressing these two things, then it's less likely to be successful, right? It's I call them the diet and exercise of sleep. So like, just like somebody who wants to lose weight or get stronger, but they're wanting to take a supplement for it, but they're not really wanting to change what they eat or how much exercise they do. It's not gonna work for them, right? But same thing goes with sleep.
So, Eric, since you're the expert, board certified in what is it, behavioral sleep medicine?
Yeah.
Let me ask you about a controversial topic:
Hmm. Mm.
napping. Where do you
Oh,
stand on napping?
napping. Napping is one of the best examples of something that middle group can do, but not that third group. And I'll tell you why. So if you happen to be in that middle group, you can sleep at night no problem, but you're not
Mhm.
getting enough. that's a decent time or an opportunity to fit in a nap.
Mhm.
You were the person who might benefit most from a nap, right? Because you're not struggling to sleep, you're just not getting enough of it, right? So potentially napping can
Yeah.
help you. If you are somebody with insomnia or you fall into that 30% group, um, napping you should avoid, right? And the reason is when you have insomnia, you want to leverage that sleep drive, that balloon as much as
Okay.
possible. And when you nap in the middle of the day, you drain air
You
pressure from
deflate
that
that pressure.
balloon.
Okay, that
So
makes
at
sense.
night,
Yeah.
it's not going to be as powerful and it's not going to help you fall asleep, which is, or stay asleep, which
Mhm.
is sort of the main problem. So napping is a perfect example of it's not a universal recommendation.
So
It
then how like, with so much of this being, bespoke, for lack of a better word, like, you have to know yourself.
yeah.
Um, how do you help people? Do you have an assessment or a self-assessment or something that allows people to, because I think some of us might know our own patterns because we've been thinking about this and paying attention for a while. Um, and maybe it's just the world we live in. Others, they just want an app, or they want a quick assessment. Like, put me in a zone, put me in a quadrant, put me, just tell me what to do. Um,
Yeah.
any help for folks like that?
I'd say if you want to simplify it as much as possible, the deciding factor is whether or not you struggle to fall asleep or stay asleep
Okay.
at night. Our nighttime sleep window should always be prioritized, right? As opposed to I'm going to get most of my sleep in the middle of the day and just not sleep a lot at night. That's not a great strategy. But if you are somebody who, even if you're not getting enough, when you do go to bed, you're falling asleep in under 30 minutes and you're staying asleep consistently with maybe a couple
Mhm.
awakenings, but you're able to fall back asleep and you're able to sleep until it's time to get up or your alarm goes off, then you're somebody who would fall into that middle category. If you are struggling with any of those things that I just described, to fall asleep, to stay
Mhm.
asleep, um, then you are in that last category, right? That I call it zone three. It just means that you're struggling and you need a slightly more specific guidance than you're going to readily find online. We often hear about sleep hygiene, right? We hear a lot of talk
Yeah.
about that. And this is things like sort of avoiding caffeine late in the day or making sure your room is dark, quiet, and cool. There is nothing wrong with these recommendations. Sleep hygiene is great. We should
Mhm.
all be doing it. Um, the issue is that it's the majority of things you're going to find online. And for those people who are struggling, and they do nothing but try to apply these sleep hygiene
Yeah.
techniques, they're likely not gonna benefit all that much.
And then you feel
Um,
like, well, I'm trying everything they're telling
yes,
me and it's still not working, which
and that's
just
a
adds
huge
to the
problem. That's a
anxiety.
huge problem because then when somebody comes to somebody like me and they say, "I've tried everything," they're discouraged.
Yeah.
They're discouraged. The problem is that they are, um just listening to advice or recommendations that aren't powerful enough to address their sleep. And there are good recommendations. And but I understand that if you're just going online searching, it's hard to figure out what those are because there's so much out there.
So I have a strategy for putting myself to sleep, and I'll share it with you
Mm,
so that you can either say, "Yeah, that's okay,"
mhm.
or "Stop doing that because for whatever reason." So what I found works for me, because my brain struggles to stop. It struggles. It's like I'm on cognitive overload all the time. So what I have found works for me is, I'll go to bed. I will play on my phone a podcast of, and usually it'll be like a political podcast of someone who I completely agree with. Like, so they're just telling me what I found does not work is if it's someone that I don't agree with, because that stimulates me. It's like I keep wanting to argue. But if it's just someone who pleasantly expresses generally agreeable things, and I have a timer so that I'll time it for about 25 minutes, I'll put it on and I will listen. And then there's a point at which I just go to sleep. It's like I stop thinking about, I don't even know when. It's just at some point in that 25 minutes, I go to sleep. Um, and that seems to work. Is that okay? Or is that, am I in some way stimulating my brain in a way I might not realize I am?
No, I think that that is okay. It's gonna be very individual, right?
Yeah.
And I encourage people to find something that works for them similar to the way that you just did. It's okay because, 1, it's not bringing up strong emotional reactions. It's not getting you
Yeah.
riled up or frustrated. And it's serving more as a distraction, right? Something that you can listen to, focus your mind a little bit on it so that it's not going in every other direction, right? So, um, non-stimulating simply means it's not getting you worked up in any
Right.
sort of way. And that's not getting you worked up. And instead it's just there for something that your mind can focus on,
Because
right?
if I
That
if I
works.
just try to go to sleep, what does tend to happen is that I will pick up on a thought like, "Oh, yeah, I'm late on this. Remember to do this tomorrow," or this project. I'll start thinking about that, and so it'll sort of direct my mind to something. You use the word non-stimulative. Yeah, I think that's exactly it. It's just interesting enough, almost like I hate to call it a bedtime story, but that's what
Mhm.
it is. It's essentially an adult bedtime story that's pleasant enough, pulls me in, and I go to sleep. Um,
Absolutely. There's now many of these sleep meditations or literally stories for adults that they can listen to as they're falling asleep.
oh, really? Okay.
Yes, so it is a thing, and that's it. It's sort of benign, it's sort of there to focus your mind a little bit. Something else you could do, and I do tend to recommend this for people who do struggle with this idea of going to bed and their mind starts sort of bouncing
Yeah.
everywhere, is just to spend a few minutes, 10 minutes or so, 5, 10 minutes, an hour or so before going to bed, where you're just sort of writing down a few things that you are concerned about or that you need to get done, along with sort of a real simple, like, tomorrow I will do
Mhm.
this in terms of resolving that issue. So you said, like, I've got to pay that bill. Well, perfect. I've got to pay that bill. You write it down. I'll do it tomorrow. That seems simplistic. It seems it's surprising to people how doing something like that can ease and relax some of those thoughts
Yeah.
because your brain, if you've got something like a bill to pay and you realize it when you're laying in bed, uh, your brain is going to do its best to try to keep you from forgetting it.
It's true. Yes, there's a little part of the brain that's gonna stay awake about that unless you can offload it
Yeah.
temporarily.
Yeah, and I call it cognitive offloading. It's
Uh-huh.
just to get some of these thoughts out of your head onto paper to relax some of the pressure on your brain to remember. Um,
So what, and this is not a fair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What advice would you give to your typical business leader who may, him or herself, have their own sleep challenges, but they're really wanting to think about the workforce, the people who work with them and for them? Um, I I think as our world evolves, we're going to be expecting more from our leaders. There was a time when what you expected from a leader was give direction, uh, focus on priorities, KPIs, business objectives, drive, 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 and all of that is still relatively important. But I think we are yearning for more from our leaders today, and particularly the younger generations. They're expecting a leader who sees them, who knows them, pays attention to them. I hate to say it, maybe parents them every now
mhm,
and then.
mhm,
I mean, I just think that is the expectation, or the need, not from everybody, but from some. And so, um, I had a gentleman a couple weeks ago. In a conversation, he said, "I had one of my direct reports mention to me that she'd been prescribed an anti-anxiety medication." And he said, "It was the most frightening thing because I didn't know what to say. I didn't know, well, do I say nothing? I mean, she shared it with me. I do I don't say, I just didn't know. I didn't know what to say. But my gut tells me I need to, I need to be supportive. I need to say something. My point is that
mhm,
I think we're expecting more from our leaders. A young woman who would share that with her leader. Hey, I want you to know that I've recently been prescribed this anti-anxiety med, uh, is probably slightly opening the door to a conversation. What is like sharing that part of her. And I'm not saying that has to be true of every leader or every relationship, but we're expecting more from our leaders. And I think the leader in 2030 is going to be different than the leader of 2020 and 2010. And so things like this, like thinking about the sleep patterns of your workers and how you might be inadvertently
yeah.
creating challenges for their sleep patterns, or maybe advertently. I don't know, but I just think it's something that will probably need to be on the radar screen for leaders more so in the future than in the past. I even think, if I were to um, guide military leaders, I might say to them, I get it. I get the purpose of sleep deprivation conditioning. I get that. And at the same time, for example, I was in the nuclear Navy. So I was at the control of a nuclear power plant. And mental alertness, I'm going to guess, was pretty critical. And while I certainly should be prepared for those situations where I might be sleep deprived, I don't know that the military optimized my performance, mentally speaking, by the way they conditioned us through sleep deprivation. So, and I don't want to derail this, but I guess what I'm saying is, I think that this is an important issue to be on the mental radar of leaders going forward. That's why I reached out. I read a couple of your LinkedIn posts, was really intrigued, and I think there's a serious there, and along with nutrition, along with
Mhm.
mental health, along with all of the things that make humans optimal as humans. Um, and I want to be respectful of your time. I mean, I guess,
No, I think I like what you just said, right? As humans, right?
yeah,
Because when we treat humans as if they are machines that can be pushed endlessly, one, that's clearly not true.
right,
They will break and their performance will suffer. But if you can actually switch the focus to imagining them as, okay, this is a person. We can sort of optimize our team for
Right.
greater performance, right? If you know that 40% of your workforce is not operating at 100%, well, how do we reduce that a little bit? How do we get that to 20%? Because what's the benefits of that, right? Cost savings, more productivity, efficiency, things like that. So it's a shift in mindset, um, with regard to what sleep is and what sleep can do for you, as opposed to it being viewed as a nuisance that we just have to do.
Yeah, there's this sort of mechanistic quality to the way many of us. I know this is the way I was raised. I would call it mechanistic. Sleep is time. Time is productivity.
Mhm,
So if you can reduce your need for sleep, you have more time to do the important things.
mhm.
And even this conversation helps to remind me sleep is one of the important things. It's a contributor to the important things. Um, and it's not as simple as saying I'll lop off an hour and a half of my sleep so that I have an hour and a half available for doing whatever.
No,
Um,
that person's judgment, decision making, critical thinking, processing speed, mental health, the speed at which they become burnt out, um, is going to dramatically be affected. I refer to sleep as a performance enhancer,
yeah,
right? And it should be sort of thought as in those terms, because um, so many of us are operating currently at a deprived state. So sleep can
yes.
actually take you from here up to here. Um,
And it may have been, if I'm tracking with you, it may have been so long since you felt like what that felt like that you've convinced yourself, well, I was in my 20s then. Of course I felt
right,
mentally alert, or I was in my 30s. Of course I felt mentally alert.
sure.
Um, It may be, though, that you have just degraded your expectations so much for such a long period of time. So I'm going to go back to kind of where we started. I love that baseline task of let your body remember what it's like to get enough sleep by very consciously giving yourself 7.5 to 8 hours of sleep, um,
For a
for an
consistent
extended period
period
of
of
time.
time.
To,
Yeah.
let's say 2 weeks,
Yep.
or longer if you can. And then just notice what that feels like. And then notice how your body reacts to that. Now, I say that, and even as I'm trying to figure out logistically, how would I make that happen? It means going to bed earlier. Not used to that. It means I
Okay.
have to stop
This is a good
stimulating my,
this is a good point, and we should
yeah,
talk about this, right? So I should note, because I do work with people, business leaders
yeah,
and whatnot. So I understand that there are legitimate challenges to this. Some people are very busy, and then they get home and they're very busy. We have very full lives, and it's not as simple as saying, well, yeah, make sure you're getting 7 hours of
yeah,
sleep. In those situations, that is ideal. But in those situations when it's not that I'm not prioritizing, it is that I have way too much on my plate currently. In those situations, my recommendation would be to shift the focus from quantity and make sure that the quality of that sleep is
mhm,
as good as possible. And there's a few ways you can do that. The top 3, if these are global, like, these are
yeah,
things that anybody can do, and this should sort of be the focus. If you're gonna do a few things in your life and you wanna make sure that the sleep you're getting is, as high quality as possible, I would do these 3 things. The first one is, instead of you brought up a few times this idea of going to bed at the same time. Instead of that, I would shift the goal to waking up at the same time every day. 7 days a week, right? Because that gives one, it gives you a little flexibility in the evening. You can go to bed a little later on days that you need to, or you can potentially, if you're really exhausted, go to bed a little bit before. But
Mhm.
waking up at the same time is the best way to anchor your circadian rhythm so
Okay.
that it is firing at the right time for you throughout the night and throughout the day. So setting a more consistent wake time, it's hard, especially on the weekends, but it's easier to do during the week, right?
Mhm.
Um, because we have this sort of artificial wake up time that we're supposed to get up at. So that would be my first thing. If you're going to focus on something, focus on waking up at the same time every day, right? This will become, it will be difficult at first if you're not used to this, but it will become relatively easy over
Got
time.
it.
I
Mhm.
remember going through this change myself, and it was tough. I used to definitely love to sleep in on the weekend. It felt good. But
Mhm.
the more I did this, I don't have to set an alarm. I'm going to naturally wake up because I've trained my body that that's what when I wake up. So that is the first thing. The second thing is going to be the more sort of controversial or difficult, and I might hear pushback through the screen
Hmm.
on this one. And that is to, whenever possible, either reduce or ideally avoid alcohol. Um, and I get that that's challenging, and I get that that's maybe not what a lot of people want to hear. But if there is one thing that damages your sleep more than anything else, it
Mhm.
is alcohol. And it might be surprising to some people because there's a perception that alcohol helps you fall asleep,
Yeah.
and it does. There for a lot of people, it does help them fall asleep a little bit earlier. But beyond that, everything it does causes damage to your sleep. So the sleep quality that you get is horrible. Um, so you're going to wake up feeling worse the next day, and you start, uh, and this just builds, right? It builds time and time again. So this is my general recommendation. Do I drink? Yes, I do, but a heck of a lot less than I used to. And when I know I've got something important coming up, or I need to
Mhm.
be on my game the next day or the next week, I will avoid it completely because I know that my sleep is going to be so much better when I don't drink. Right. So that's number two. And that's the
So
one a lot of
I'm
people
tracking
struggle
with you
with.
so far, but I have a real anxiety about number 3. I'm afraid you're gonna mention coffee.
No, it's
Okay.
not. So I am not in any way, shape, or form. There's nothing inherently wrong with caffeine as long as um, it's done early enough in the day.
Mhm.
So we talk about that sleep drive or the balloon earlier. What that is a buildup of a chemical called adenosine in your brain, and that buildup leads us to feeling sleepy. Caffeine blocks adenosine receptors, meaning that it's continuously building in our brain, but our brain's not registering it. That's why we feel more alert. But then once the caffeine is out of our system, all
Mhm.
of a sudden it all attaches to their various receptors, and that is why we experience what is commonly known as the caffeine crash. Um, so
So
caffeine
I
is
didn't mean to
fine.
interrupt you. You're about to go into number 3. So you satisfied my anxiety
Yeah,
about you were about to.
drink coffee. Just
Okay,
do it.
excellent.
Just the only thing to keep in mind with caffeine is that it has a long half-life, about 5 hours. So meaning five
Okay.
to 6 hours after drinking caffeine, half of it's still in your system. And ideally, you want it all out. So keep it a minimum of your last amount of caffeine. Try to keep it at least 10 hours before trying to sleep.
Okay. Reasonable.
And the third one is You've brought this up a few times in our conversation, but it is to allow yourself some period of time in the evening before bed where you really disconnect. Um, I generally tell people an hour at least, right? To where you are not checking email, you are not working, you are either watching some relatively benign but enjoyable TV show, or you can even watch a movie, or you're reading, or you're um, doing something else
Mhm.
that is low stimulation. Um, Building in that buffer window so that you're not going 100% and then going into bed
Yeah.
and expecting your brain to turn off immediately. It's just like you would never put a treadmill next to your bed, run as fast as you can right up until your bedtime, jump off of it, get into bed, and expect to fall
Mhm.
asleep quickly. It's not going to happen. So those would be just generally the three things I would recommend. There are others, but those are the biggies.
So, Eric, this is this is fantastic, and I know there are going to be a lot of people who watch this who want to either reach out. I'll make sure that in the show notes we include a link to your LinkedIn profile and other information about you, because um, I think that the kind of people who watch this podcast or listen to this podcast, um, they tend to have their heads around leadership and how do we as leaders show up more effectively for our people, and then how do we help our people show up more effectively for our organizations and for ourselves. And this is fantastic. This is given me so much food for thought, and I um, hopefully this is not the last of these conversations. I would love to follow up at some point in the future and just um, talk even more about this, because I think this is at least as important as exercise and nutrition, at least, and it's like one of those root fundamental issues that if you don't get that right, it's hard to get the maximum benefit out of any of the other things that you might be doing. Any last words you'd like to share before we wrap up?
Only that I would actually place it above exercise and nutrition, or at least foundational. Like,
Mhm.
let's say, because it just affects a few more domains in our life to a greater extent. Especially, I think when we think about um, leadership, we think about uh, performance. The cognitive element is so incredibly important. Being able to make good decisions quickly. That's what sleep is going to help you achieve. Not only you, but then everybody else that you're working with.
So my personal life totally validates what you just said, because when I am getting enough sleep, I make better decisions around nutrition and around exercise.
Yes.
Um, and the reverse is true. When I'm sleep deprived, I do not eat well. And even if I might force myself to exercise, um, the few exercise related injuries I've had have generally been when I'm sleep deprived and pushing my body.
Yeah.
Um, you're just not on.
I have
Um,
a saying, and a saying that says, sleep deprivation makes you weaker, sicker, fatter, and dumber. And it's a little harsh, but I say it that way so you remember it,
yeah,
right? Because and the fatter element, I throw that in there based on what you were just saying, and I'll be brief on it, but the reason that that's in there is that when you are sleep deprived, it alters two very important hormones that control not only your hunger but also your cravings. So, yes, this idea of willpower around diet is you completely undermine that if you are sleep deprived. But when you are fully rested, it's actually incredibly, or it's much easier to um, stop eating at a certain point and to
Mhm.
avoid certain foods that you'd like to avoid. So yes, it's one of those lesser known impacts of sleep deprivation.
So then I wonder, and I know we, eventually we have to stop this conversation, but and we keep triggering each other's thoughts. Backing up and you look at our society more broadly, there are so many health related challenges related to nutrition, exercise, weight gain, mental health and wellness, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I wonder to what degree the underlying root cause of all of it is lack of adequate sleep.
It impacts every one of those things. So just take mental health. So I'm a psychologist by training, so it is uh, relatable. But let's just take depression for example. Many times, people who are depressed, one of the symptoms is sleep difficulties, right? So they
Mhm.
are sleeping less, sometimes sleeping more. That's a slightly different aspect of it. But you can trigger depression by sleep depriving somebody. So it's bidirectional, right?
Mhm.
So it literally will impact, and that's why I said at the very beginning of this, sleep is the single greatest factor that impacts everything else in your life that matters. No other single factor impacts as many elements in our performance, our health, and our well-being as much as sleep. So that's what I'm trying to spread the word about.
So, Dr. Eric Rogers, I I just want to say thank you. This is great. This is really, really great and really, really important. And we will talk again, and I will do what I can to direct more people toward you because I think there's an uber issue to be addressed, and it's relevant not just to leadership, but really life in general. So thank you so much. We will talk again. And again, if any of you are listening or watching and looking to reach out to Eric, just go to the show notes and we'll have all the appropriate links there. I guess that's it. Thanks, Eric.
All right. Thanks, Dan.